Hello and welcome back to Football League World TV. I'm Billy Mulley and today I'm joined by Ben Wignall, our resident PNE fan, to talk all things Preston North End. Ben, how are you getting on?
Yeah, after the weekend, I'm in a pretty jubilant mood, beating one of your good rivals and being in the top six. It's a good position to be in coming into a busy festive break. And it's a long time since I've done one of these as well. We had a bit of a hiatus, haven't we? So it's good to be back.
You seem in dreamland and you've got every right to be after the weekend. Any Preston fans out there today, we're going to be discussing our Preston North End, the real deal. Please send us your thoughts and any questions that you may have to Ben. But we'll get started. First of all, Ben, we'll speak about expectations going into the season, of course. Mid-table finish last time around. You always feel like you can build on that, but ultimately, did you think the top six was a realistic ambition going into the campaign?
I think it all depended on the recruitment. I think we were kind of sleepwalking into a relegation battle with Frankie McAvoy last season until the change was made with Ryan Lowe, and we picked up a lot of good results between January and the end of the season. There was a few iffy results in there, and there was a drubbing off Fulham and a few other teams. But I think it did depend on the recruitment going into the summer. I think by mid-July, you wanted four more players, two strikers and two wing backs, and we only ended up getting two of them. So I think by the start of the season, when we still needed a striker, when we were still waiting on Cameron Archer, which obviously didn't end up happening, and a right wing back, I think there was a kind of a bit of negativity seeping in that, I think we might not be able to push on as much as we thought if we didn't get those players in. I think we always expect to be a mid-table club. The budget we've got compared to other teams, it's not the greatest. It's steadily gone up with the players getting big wage rises when they've been here for a long period of time. But yeah, compared to other teams that are paying certain things in the championship, I think mid-table is where we always expect to be. But there's always the hope that the championship's a very open league, and we saw what happened with Huddersfield and Luton Town last season. So I think there was always the hope that we'd be one of those kind of outsiders looking in for the playoffs this season.
And you mentioned it there, the competitive nature of the championship. It's always throws up bizarre kind of stats and other bits. And I think the crazy stat from the championship at the start of the season was that it was the eighth game where Preston North End eventually conceded a goal, 7 clean sheets to start the campaign, 5 of them 0-0 draws, of course. But how do you assess Preston's sort of defensive resilience so far? And sort of speaking at the start of the season, you were slightly worried about the defensive options going into the campaign. So how impressed have you been with how Peony have performed as a defensive unit?
Yeah, it's been a real surprise at how defensively we performed. I think there was always a worry that we might be a little bit short in that area. Obviously, Seth Vandenberg had been with us for the last 18 months from Liverpool, and he performed very well, firstly at wing back, and then his more natural position of a right-sided centre back, and he was really good in there. And I think we were never really going to be in with a realistic shout of getting him back, and he'd potentially outgrown us. And there was Jordan Story coming back, who'd been at Sheffield Wednesday to get game time in League One, but fans weren't particularly sure if he was going to be the kind of one to, come into that back three and make us a playoff team. But I think those first 7 games where he, Liam Lindsay, and Andrew Hughes made that back three up and kept them clean sheets, it was just a remarkable feat, wasn't it? I think it was a talk of social media that we normally go under the radar, but it was such a rare feat that we were starting to come into the minds of these neutral fans, and probably for the wrong reasons, PNE fans. You want to see a few goals, 2 goals in the first 7 games where wasn't exactly positive, but if going 7 games unbeaten, you can't really crab it too much. But that back three, and I think bringing Freddie Woodman in as well has really inspired the confidence in the defence. I think we've gone so long with a lot of long goalkeepers. Obviously, had Daniel Everson for the last 18 months, and he was phenomenal in his shot stopping. And we've been lucky with long goalkeepers over the years. We've had Jordan Pickford, Sam Johnston, Daniel Everson. We've been blessed in that department. But in Freddie Woodman, we've got long-term solution for that position. And he's kept 11 clean sheets in 22 games, which is absolutely phenomenal. I think he's still topping the championship leaderboard for that. I think the main surprise is probably Liam Lindsay coming into that defence. He played around 18, 20 times last season. By no means a regular in that back three, but he's coming in. He's the player that I think Stoke City probably thought he'd signed a few years ago from Barnsley when he was part of that defence that played very well in League One, and he's earned himself a new contract until 2025. He signed that in the last week, and he's been absolutely phenomenal. So if that defence can keep on going until the end of the season, then who knows where we could end up.
And as you mentioned in there, it was a slow start on the goal scoring front, only 2 goals in the first 7 games, but it's a completely different story now looking at it. You've seen 5 out of the last 6 games where PNE have scored 2 goals or more, completely transforming what the narrative was at the start of the campaign. So what do you make of the attacking lineup at the moment, and what do you accredit the kind of change of form in front of goal to?
I really don't know where the change has come from. We were having chances in those first 7 games where we only scored twice. I remember the Rotherham game when it was 0-0. I think we had 22 shots, something like that, about 8 on target, and keeper Johansson had a bit of a world. He kept us out in that game, and there was a few times where we had clear-cut chances in those games and just couldn't put them away. And I'm not sure what it came down to. Ryan Lowe was in the press saying that the penny will drop at some stage, and quite obviously it has. And I think we needed to. Obviously, Emile Reese was the main goal scorer last season with 17, and I think we've just had to kind of work a way out of getting other players into those goal scoring positions in the last few weeks. Obviously, Ched Evans has been the one that's surprisingly got amongst the goals. He'd not scored for 11 months until he scored his brace against Reading at the start of November. But I think the kind of goals starting to be shared out now. Ben Woodman's got his first league goal. Ben Whiteman's chipping in with a few. I think it's just Law's way of I think this break's really helped in terms of, I think we saw against Blackburn, the pressing and the attacking way he wants to play. It's probably going to come to the fore now. It wasn't, even though we have been scoring goals in the weeks before the World Cup, it wasn't always clicking. Obviously, we lost 4-2 to Millwall, 4-2 to Blackpool, so things were kind of going the other way with scoring goals, but also those conceded goals we started to creep in like they weren't at the start of the season. But we're definitely showing promising signs on the attacking front, and if we'll speak about January later, but I think if we can add another striker in January, I think that we'll be all right in front of goal for the rest of the season.
And before we get on to January, we'll speak a little bit about home and away form. It's quite strange to see, always strange to see a team that's performing a lot better on the road than at home. Of course, PNE are averaging 1.91 points per game away from Deepdale. How do you assess that? Are you worried about home form, considering it's around 1.18 points per game, or do you think that you've found an avenue to win games and you're just going to try and benefit off that kind of trend?
I think you've always got to try and win your home games, draw your away games. That's a kind of blueprint for promotion, but I think it suits us being the away team and not exactly being the favourites for a win. I think time and time again over the years we have struggled with playing teams who kind of not just park the bus, but make it difficult for us putting bodies behind the ball. We have tended to struggle with that. Whereas away games where you can, be that team who are the defensive ones, and if teams are throwing players at you and you're defending like we did at the start of the season, you can hit teams on the counter attack. Like, I think that's a few of our goals, especially last season. We were very effective away from home in that regard, and it's kind of carried on to this season. We're not just like a counter-attacking team. We've been pretty effective from crosses as well. I think you'll have seen at Luton, Billy, that Roy Brady's cross for Brad Potts' won the goal. I think Brady's crosses have been essential this season for some of the goals, and I think we're never going to be an all-out attacking team away from home, but I think that suits us. I think we did see against Blackburn, we will press high up the pitch when we need to, and it was very effective, especially on Saturday. But for some reason, it just suits us being away from home more than home. But I'm hoping that the results do start to pick up at Deepdale, because we played a lot of the so-called big teams of the promotion favourites at Deepdale already. So I'm hoping that we can turn that form around against the so-called lower sides and get some points in 2023.
And of course, any PNE fans out there that have got any thoughts they want to share with us today, or any questions directed towards Ben, or actually any other Championship fan that has seen a little bit of PNE so far this season, please feel free to get involved. We'll get your comments shared and we'll get any questions directed at Ben. We'll go to the January transfer window now, Ben, and I guess it's a difficult time to really assess what will happen. It's kind of a stick or twist situation, I guess, with where PNE are at the moment. You've alluded to the sort of striker situation already. Is there any other areas on the pitch that you feel will need addressing? Do you think that depth's needed at Preston?
I think Ryan Lowe's always made the point of not having too big of a squad. I think we trimmed it in the summer and released quite a few players, but he did make the point of wanting 4 new players in the middle of July, and he only got 2 of those. So obviously, I've mentioned the strike. We probably do need one more, and all the noises are pointing towards, trying to get Cameron Archer back. Hopefully, Aston Villa do get a new striker, which will hopefully accelerate that deal. There's been an interview out in the last few weeks from Cameron's brother saying that PNE is his favoured destination if he does get that loan move. So hopefully, all parties can come together and get a deal sorted. I think goal scoring was a real worry at the start of the season, and Emile Rees is kind of not been a shadow of himself from last season, because he's a very unpredictable player, but he's definitely not been as effective as he was last season. Obviously, Ched Evans has come into some goals, but then you've got Sean Maguire, who's not scored in over a year, and Troy Parrott, who got his first league goal and then went down 5 seconds late with a torn hamstring. So he should be back in January, but you look at him in front of goal, you're never inspired to see him. He's had chances, but he's just not been hitting the back of the net. So getting an Archer back who can make chances out of nothing would be good. Might be wishful thinking, but we'll keep our fingers crossed for that one. But I think the only other position you could say is probably right wing back. That's the one position that Lowe wanted a new one in the summer. I think we got linked with a few players, Moses Odebajo, Cyrus Christian. None of them happened, and it's just if Brad Potts goes down injured, we've not really got any depth there. We've got Matthew Olasunde, who's not in the 25-man squad, and he's kind of the forgotten man. He's only played, I think, 3 times since he signed last in the summer of 2021, so I think he'll be out of the exit door if the lower league club wants him in January. We've got Alan Brown to cover it wing back, but his best position's in the middle. So definitely a striker and a right wing back would be ideal. In January, I think we've got linked with Conor Bradley, who's on loan at Bolton from Liverpool, but I think all the signs are pointing for him to be staying at Bolton. So I think we'll have to cast our net out a bit wider, but hopefully I know there was no budget left in kind of around deadline day to get any new signings in August, but hopefully the hierarchy, see what position we're in going into January. Hopefully we'll still be in and around the playoffs, and kind of some budgets freed up to let Lowe get the few players he needs in.
And you mentioned there about Lowe potentially getting the funds that are needed to make sure that PNE have a squad full of depth. Just looking at Lowe in sort of an individual level, how do you assess how he's performed so far as PNE boss, given he was relatively inexperienced coming into the role? Of course, he done a very good job with Plymouth, but in terms of his managerial career, he's still, I guess, in his infancy. So how do you think he's done acclimatising to the Championship, of course, last year, and then building what has been thus far a real push for the top 6 places?
Yeah, I think this past weekend was a 1-year anniversary of his appointment, and before he came in, we had just got defeated by Blackburn 1-0, and it was a pretty miserable time to be a PNE fan this time in 2021, and he's kind of completely shifted the club culture. He's got the fans kind of back on side and together, and he did that pretty quickly. I think he's inexperienced, but he kind of got his methods together pretty quickly. He's got an experienced coach beside him in Maya Marsh, and I think that's helped him a lot. Obviously, he probably would have wanted Stephen Schumacher with him, but he got the Plymouth jobs and gone on to he's doing very well with them, but he's kind of got his kind of methods in place at PNE. And I think I did read a stat this week that I think, going over the whole year, I think if PNE would be in the top 6 on the basis of points won since he's been manager over the course of the 2 seasons. So I think that shows what a job he's doing with the budget he's got. Obviously, fans will say he wasn't properly backed in the summer with the players he brought in. Obviously, Freddie Woodman was the only player we signed for a transfer fee, and the rest were loans and free transfers. So I think if he was backed, we could be even higher than where we are right now. But I think it just shows what kind of a job he's done to have us in 6th place. There's big hitters like Middlesbrough and West Brom who could come to the fore, and it looks like they are doing, but they're well below us in the table at the minute. And I think it speaks volumes of, I think that performance on Saturday was the best we've seen us. We have been playing solidly this season, but I think on Saturday against Blackburn, it showed what he's trying to do, the high pressing attacking style. It was I think the most complete performance under him, and it's a very good sign of things to come.
And we'll go on here to something you mentioned off air. You said looking at the team that were, looking at the lineup to face Blackburn at the weekend. So a lot of youngsters, you were a little bit anxious going into that game because of that. But 4 of them got minutes, which again, they're all 17 to 18 years old, which is incredible enough. But they're also the players that have shown excellent signs of progression. They're a couple of them. Adair, he's been somebody that has been sort of in the first team picture for a while now. How good is it that you've got these players that you can trust that are 17, 18 years of age that can be brought on in I guess it's not a high pressure situation, but it's a situation where they can go and gain good experience. How exciting is the pipeline at Preston?
I think all PNA fans want to see a successful, academy system. I think in the 21st century, there's not been too many players who've come through and made an impact in the first team. You can think like Paul McKenna, Andy Lonergan, and Ben Davis, and to an extent Josh Earl have come through and established themselves in the first team. But years gone by, we are a Category 3 academy, which means our players are kind of at risk of the best ones getting poached by the bigger clubs. But to see the likes of Mikey O'Neill, Finlay Crossader, Jacob Slater, and Noah Mawene, who all came on Saturday to they're being given a chance by Lowe. I know it's only a brief chance on Saturday, but all the signs suggest that they will get minutes if these injury problems persist. And yeah, it's encouraging to see him coming through. I think previous managers have probably neglected the youth system. I think obviously the key name being Tyrese Dolan getting released a couple of years ago. I think Alex Neil, it's been reported that he wasn't too keen on giving him a pro deal, and obviously he's gone to Blackburn and performed pretty well. So I think since then, the fans have just wanted to see some faith in the academy, and the likes of Nick Harrison and defence have been doing very well, bringing those kids together, and especially when a few of them are PNE fans from as kids. Crossader, he's made 2 appearances now in the league. He's been a PNE fan since being growing up, and Mawene as well. It's very good to see him in the first team picture. Obviously, his dad Yul was an iconic player in the early 2000s for us, and carrying on his name and bringing it to PNE, that's a really good sign as well. I hope that these youth players get a few more minutes by the end of the season. Obviously, Lowe will want to. We've got a lot of experienced players in the squad, and if we're in and around the top 6, perhaps these players aren't going to get the chances, and they should maybe in January seek some loans, maybe. But it is exciting to see the youth boys doing well, and we've even got a Brazilian wonder kid now in the under 18s. We played Rotherham in the Youth Cup on Friday, and we've got an under 16s player, Felipe Rodriguez Gentile, who scored 5 goals, and he's making a little name for himself now. I think we scouted him from the Liverpool leagues from Highton. So, our next, even though we are a Category 3 academy, we are, scouting the local areas for talents where, these bigger clubs are not looking at, and hopefully it's not only profitable for us in the future, but also they come through and establish themselves in the first team.
Certainly exciting times with all the talent coming through at PNE. We'll go on to any challenges you see, Ben. Of course, what we've talked about so far, everything's been very, very positive. But of course, there's still a large chunk of the campaign left to play. What barriers do you see being in the way of Preston succeeding this season and then potentially, not getting a spot in the playoff positions?
I think the main thing is breaking down those lower, in the table teams. We've struggled for it for years, typically at home as well. I think the Birmingham game was, I know Birmingham are a better team than they were a few years back now, but I think when they went 1-0 up, kind of put men behind the ball and we struggled to break them down. And it's kind of been a running theme of our story at Deepdale the last few years against those kind of teams. We've took the game to some big teams this season, We got a 1-1 draw against Burnley, we beat Norwich away, we drew Watford at home, and we've shown we can put it up to these teams. It's now just about some consistency and especially getting those wins at Deepdale. I think that's the biggest challenge because we've shown we can do it away. I assume we've got the best record in the league away from home. So I think that puts it in good stead. It's just getting back to Deepdale and getting some consistency and also keeping our players fit. We saw on Saturday when the team sheets came out, there was a surprise when 6 or 7 first team players were put down as injured, and we still don't really know the outcome or the details of any of those injuries. Ryan Lowe's keeping it very close to his chest, so hopefully we can keep those players fit, because you don't really want to be relying on young players coming off the bench, throwing them in at the deep end if we're behind in any games. You want to kind of rely on that experience. So hopefully we can keep our players fit, get some more wins under our belt at Deepdale especially, and we'll see where it takes, I guess.
I'm going to push you for an answer here, Ben. Will Preston North End finish in the playoffs during what remains of this championship campaign?
It is a tough one. I am an overly pessimistic man, so I would probably right now say no, even though we are in the top 6. I think there's going to be clubs that come to the fore, your Middlesbroughs, who are on a winning streak under Michael Carrick. West Brom under Corban, I think they're going to fly up the table. I think they've had I've not really been an XG man, but they've been up the top of the XG table all season, and I think they'll, shoot up the table and challenge for the playoffs. I think it just all depends on January. We get another wing back to compete with Potts, and we get a Cameron Archer, an Archer type striker who can fire in the goals to, help the likes of Reece, Evans, Parrott. Then I think we've got a better chance of sustaining this run of form and being in the top 6. But I think from my pessimistic angle, I'm gonna say no, but I'd be pleasantly surprised and delighted if we get in the top 6, obviously.
Well, yes, it's certainly going to be an exciting time for Preston North End fans as the rest of the campaign goes on. Well, that brings us to the end of today's show. Thank you very much, Ben, for joining, and thank you for everybody else for watching. We're excited here to see how PNE do. As we said before, it's a close and competitive championship campaign, meaning that it's only going to generate more excitement as the rest of the season goes on. Coming up on Football League World TV tomorrow, Sam Rourke and Marcus Ali will be debating whether or not there are any clubs in the division that can stop Burnley to the title after what has been a brilliant start to the campaign for Vincent Kompany. But until then, it is goodbye from us.